that they were right.
Distinguished guests.
This is counterproductive.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to each and every one of you. Thank you so much for your participation and your attendance here this afternoon. My name is Azadeh Zabetti, and I will be your moderator at this panel session, where we will be looking at disinformation and the impact that it has on Western government policy towards Iran. Our aim during the next hour or so will really be to look at the campaign that has been conducted and orchestrated by the Iranian regime, but with a particular focus on the impact that it has on Western government policy, but also on policymakers around the world. I would like our panelists to pay particular and a focus on the disinformation campaign as it has affected Iran's main opposition movement, which is, of course, the NCRI and the MEK. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined on this panel by a very distinguished number of speakers who will be addressing you each in turn. I am joined on my left by Struan Stevenson, on my right by Candice Bergen, but also by Director Louis Free, by Ambassador Lincoln Bloomfield, and of course our very own Steve McCabe. I'd like to thank most sincerely each of our panelists for joining us here this afternoon, for accepting our invitation to be here. And I must say, I'm very much looking forward to hearing each of your contributions and experiences, but also to hearing about those experiences and as they have differed on both sides of the political divide and, of course, on both sides of the pond. In terms of housekeeping, panelists, I will be keeping to a very strict 7 minutes per speaker, please. And without further ado, I'd like to kick off with Mr. Struan Stevenson. I'll turn around. Struan, I know that in your decades of experience as a parliamentarian and as a politician, you have really written extensively about this subject, but also you've delivered many speeches with regards to the misinformation campaign that has been orchestrated by Iran's Ministry of Intelligence and Security. You've also looked in particular at how there are cooperative journalists and lobbyists that in fact do further the agenda of the Iranian regime. Perhaps you'd like to kick off really by telling us the modus operandi of the Iranian regime in this regard, and also your experiences. Perhaps you could elaborate.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Azadeh. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I should start by saying what wonderful news that we heard that President Macron's attempt to ban the huge rally tomorrow in Place des Invalides has been overturned by our lawyers. And let all of us send a message to President Macron and any of his other appeasers. Anytime you guys or ladies try and take us to court, you will lose the case. As you were saying, I've written quite a few books. My most recent one was entitled Dictatorship and Revolution, A Contemporary History of Iran. And one of the chapters I entitled The Demonization of the Opposition. Having supported the NCRI, the MEK for the past 2 decades, I've come across that on many occasions, and many people in this room and many people in this panel will have had similar experiences. I had an 18-month court case in America where a guy had, and this was quite recent, a guy who had been arrested by the FBI and charged with being a foreign agent. I wrote an article because he had accepted $250,000 from the Iranian embassy to the United Nations in New York. And he had been lobbying the Senate, Congress about the wonders that were being achieved by the Islamic Republic of Iran. And he was writing articles and books saying how great the mullahs were. And I wrote an article saying this guy was a spy. In America, to be charged with being a spy is different, apparently, from being charged with being a foreign agent. So he sued me for libel and defamation. And in the court, I told the lady judge, I said, listen, I come from the UK where we invented James Bond, who was a spy and a foreign agent. And the judge laughed and threw the case out. But, you know, this was an example to me of how the Iranian regime has infiltrated virtually to the top of parliaments, society, academia. I remember when I was 15 years in the European Parliament, every time we put down a resolution that was critical of the mullahs, there was a senior advisor to the socialist group, a guy who was a Lithuanian Iranian called Mammadov. And he would always advise the socialist group, you know, you should reject this resolution, put amendments down to kill it. And we kept saying, you know, this guy must be in the pay of the mullahs. Recently, in the Qatargate scandal, where a vice president of the parliament was found with €500,000 in a new Louis Vuitton bag, the police arrested Mammadov. And lo and behold, he was not only being paid by the Qataris, he was also being paid by the mullahs. Just what we had assumed. And there he was at the height of the European Parliament, one of the senior advisors to one of the major groups. So this kind of demonization has been going on for years. When the 3,000 refugees from the NCRI, when we finally managed to rescue them from Iraq, where they were under constant attack and being regularly killed by missile attacks and bomb attacks, and we got them over to Albania, the Iranian embassy in Tirana, which was a very small affair with a couple of ambassador and a couple of diplomats, suddenly found great new interest in Albania. And suddenly there were 25 new diplomats, most of them agents from the Ministry of Intelligence and Security in Iran. And then all of a sudden we saw people who we identified as known agents of the regime. The Pentagon published a report some years ago identifying a guy called Kodabandi and his wife, Anne Singleton, who is English, as trained agents of the Ministry of Intelligence and Security. And suddenly they were seen flying in and out of Albania. And they were seen wandering around the outskirts of Camp Ashraf III. And very often they were seen in the company of journalists from some of the famous newspapers in Europe, like Der Spiegel in Germany, Libération in France, The Guardian in England, Channel 4 News. And we then, in due course, Kodabandi and Anne Singleton, his wife, they were running a website paid for by the MOIS. And we were seeing long articles appearing under their name on their website. And lo and behold, 3 weeks later, they would appear, these articles would appear in The Guardian or Der Spiegel, attacking, defaming the NCRI, traducing the MEK, and using people who had defected from Camp Ashraf because they were homesick very often, and they would want to return to Iran, and they would quickly be recruited by the MOIS and told, if you want to return to Iran, you do what we tell you for the next 2 or 3 years. And you must traduce, you must tell all these lies and defamations about the MEK. And we saw in some of these articles that appeared in these newspapers I mentioned, guys were telling the reporters, we were tortured, people were kidnapped, there was even a murder of somebody inside Camp Ashraf. I mean, it was absolute propaganda nonsense from top to bottom. We saw recently when there was a major hacking by hacktivists in Iran of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They got an avalanche of papers and documents from the MFA in Tehran. And we discovered the mother of one of these people who had defected from the MEK and who had been recruited by the MOIS in Albania. The mother writing to the Minister of Foreign Affairs saying, but my son has done everything you told him. He has told all these lies about the MEK. He has tried to get other people from the MEK to defect and to join the ministry. He has said that, as you told him, that the MEK are a terrorist Islamic Marxist cult. Please now, can you allow him to come home to Iran? So all the things that we were saying were happening. Here was the evidence coming straight from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We should be aware that this demonization campaign is based on, if I was a farmer, I would use a word that begins with bull. But because all of us have been affected by it, we should ignore it. This is not worth the paper it's written on. It is typical of the propaganda that emanates from this regime. But I can tell you, last week, when we published the fact that 117 ex-world leaders have signed a statement backing the right of the Iranian people to rise up and overthrow their tyrannical regime, and backing the NCRI, backing the MEK and Mrs. Mariam Rajavi, the charismatic leader. When 117 former world leaders can say things like that, then you can forget the appeasers like President Macron. You can forget Antony Blinken in the State Department, who his fingerprints were all over the attack that took place on Camp Ashraf last week, when 1,200 Albanian police raided the camp using tear gas, using pepper spray, rubber batons, killing one of the refugees, attacking civilian men and women. That's not how refugees should be treated, but that was part of the appeasement policy of the State Department, who put pressure on Albania to cause that raid to take place. We know that President Macron, in that same 24 hours when that raid took place, he had spent 90 minutes on a phone call to Ebrahim Raisi, the butcher of Tehran, the current president who was a known executioner during the 1988 massacre of 30,000 political prisoners. How the president of France can spend 90 minutes on a telephone call to that butcher, and what they discussed is something that should concern all people who love freedom and love democracy in this movement and around the world. So forget the demonization. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to win. We are going to make Iran free again. And the MEK, Mrs. Rajavi, the NCRI are at the forefront of this campaign. Thanks to all the panelists for their remarks. We have a fight on our hands. And as I said earlier, I think this is a fight we're going to win. Who could say that Mrs. Rajavi's 10-point plan to restore democracy, peace, justice, women's rights, human rights, an end to the death penalty, an end to the nuclear threat, an end to the spread of aggressive war and terror in the Middle East and around the world. That would be a platform I would be proud to stand for election on myself. So this is something that we are offering 85 million impoverished Iranians as an alternative to the tyranny that they have suffered for 40 years. And you know, we have to wake up. 200 people have been hanged in the past couple of months, since the beginning of May. 200 people. It's a frenzy of killing. Hundreds more who were arrested during the uprising, simply for protesting on the streets, have been moved into solitary cells to await execution. We need to stand up and be counted and tell the people of Iran that we are with you, we stand by you, we will not let this continue.